Since COVID, anxiety and depression have increased a massive 25%, according to a brief study released by World Health Organization. The U.S. also experienced the highest ever combined rate of deaths due to alcohol, drugs, and suicide during the COVID pandemic. Hey guys, I'm Brady Lyden, host and founder of Mom You're Not Alone. I'm also a local realtor and investor here in Knoxville, Tennessee. Today, I've got Emily Chadwick as my guest, and we are going to deep dive into mental health and all the issues around that. So stay tuned. All right, Emily, so in your experience, how has COVID affected mental health?
I think as far as how people suffer with mental health, the isolation that it caused, not being able to go out and socialize, had obvious impacts on mental health in general. For children, there was a major impact, especially ones that were just reaching school age and suddenly were not being pushed into a social environment like that. Daycare shut down, all of that stuff. So I think for families, it was like as a system, COVID was hard because all of a sudden you're stuck in the house with these people that normally you get away from for a little bit out of the day. And so if it wasn't the isolation, it was maybe the constant interaction with the people you live with or the people around you. However, on the positive side of things, COVID led to a lot of avenues opening as far as technology goes. Before COVID, and, I was in my training program as a therapist, only licensed individuals, like fully licensed, would be able to participate in telehealth, which is doing therapy over video. And with COVID, they actually enacted a law, kind of like almost like an emergency enactment, where they were letting students, interns, and people pursuing licensure also participate in that.
Okay.
And so had they not allowed that, the people in my program and all over the country would have kind of struggled to get their practicum and internship and all of that rolling because people weren't doing in person, and especially about being in a tiny room when the rule is 6 feet apart. That's not always possible. So, there were some cons to mental health, but there were kind of some pros to how we can treat that and go about addressing it.
Awesome. So if you've got a client, let's dive a little bit and more into like the telehealth and BetterHelp and some options like that. So if you have a client that is, nervous to be in person, let's take like a teen, for example, somebody with social anxiety or, anybody that fears like making that first phone call, how do you think that's going to help just, you may know this statistic. I don't know how many people actually seek a therapist or go to therapy, like out of all of the U.S. population. I don't know that we know that statistic, but let's say, I don't. You don't. Okay. I don't know that statistic either. But I would say it's a small percentage of the U.S. And so if the goal for you guys in your industry is to, get out to more people, this is going to be a huge thing, right? So how do you think that's going to help somebody that would not feel comfortable to being like face to face?
Yeah. There are some major impacts on that as well. Yes, in some ways, for people who do like being in person, they're like, that kind of takes away from the experience. But for those people, teenagers who are so used to being on their phones and went through, COVID in school time where they were doing all their work from home and whatnot, people who don't have transportation, people who seek services from, specialists or like someone who is more well-versed in an area. If they're not in the city they live, then you can kind of within states, at least in Tennessee, as long as you are seeing a therapist within the state, that is completely fine. So it opens up avenues of availability of therapists. Social anxiety is a big one because, I've had people tell me before, like, oh yeah, social anxiety, just go to a therapist and talk to a stranger that you have never met and don't know. Like that's not part of the issue at all. And so it kind of can help because you're in control of the environment you're in. And all that's bringing you together is that camera. So yeah, I think it opened up a lot of room for people who may not have been able to seek out therapy or may not have been inclined to because of the nervousness that they get being face to face with someone.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that will be huge for your all's industry to just get in front of more people. Mm-hmm. And then let's talk a little bit about, like, you know, the stigma around therapy, counseling, all of that together. So most people have the stigma that, oh, there's something wrong with you to get in therapy. Oh, you've got to have some major issues to seek that out. Yeah. And let's just talk about, like, what's the biggest benefit just in general for any person coming to therapy?
Yeah, if I had to say in general, one benefit that every single person that seeks out therapy should get is an unbiased outlook on their life coming from a third party who is not just unbiased, but unbiased and well-versed in, like, understanding how people work. And so, even though a therapist is only getting that one side of the story, they're kind of trained to explore how the other people involved with the story may feel or may have reacted. And so it can give a little bit more insight to something that is happening outside of the therapy room. I think it's also good for people to kind of be validated in their feelings. And, as a therapist, sometimes going to therapy is the first time someone's told, hey, you're not crazy, right? Like, sometimes people, kids, teenagers, and young adults will come into therapy and they'll be like, something is wrong with me, just like you said, and then come to find out that it's actually the environment they're in or the people they're around or just how they grew up and how they expected to be treated. And all it can take is an unbiased third party opinion to kind of unlock that and validate, like, yeah, of course it's hard. You're not in control of everything. And I think that's one of the most instrumental pieces for people. However, the stigma is not always good as far as how everyone perceives it. Yes, there is that idea of there's something wrong with you if you have to go to therapy, but there's also that hoop to jump through to even start therapy of admitting that you are having an issue. There's a big difference, and it doesn't look like it from the outside, but there is a big difference between I have an issue or I'm having a problem in the world or I am the problem in the world or I am the issue.
Okay. So you're helping anybody walking through your door, get that out of their head. That I am the issue. And maybe in a lot of instances we are the issue, right? Sometimes. And I think for me, so I've been seeing Emily for a little while, and I think for me it's like we've all experienced some good.
I don't know if we should say that.
Okay.
I'm not sure if we should. We shouldn't ethically say that.
Okay, got it. Let's cut out that little piece, and then I know that's okay. So for me, I've been in therapy for a while, and I think for me, it's I want to be the best version of myself. Yes, and so I'm sure you have a lot of clients like that, right? They come in just to be the best version of themselves, and I think that we've all been through some kind of trauma, some kind of childhood, whatever. Right? No parents raised us perfect. No, life is perfect, and everyone's experienced some kind of loss, trauma, issues. Yes. And so it's just like being okay with yourself to say, okay, I want to be in this next stage of my life, I want to be the best version of myself. And so I'd be curious to know how many people come to you for that versus major issues where there's been significant trauma and that's what's bringing them in.
So I will answer this for me personally. I do tend to attract and kind of work more with the population of people who have endured trauma. I work a lot with children and families. That's kind of like my specialty area. And so, a lot of times if you're bringing in a child, it's either because something big has happened to them, around them, or they have done something that has really, set off their caregivers and worried them a little bit. And so I think a lot of times, I guess around maybe 85% of 90% of the people I see have experienced intense trauma. Now, sometimes they're not seeking out therapy for that trauma. Sometimes what happens is they're seeking out therapy because life is hard. And all of a sudden, through that validation and through that kind of like seeing through a third-party lens, they realize that that rough childhood, that hard parenting that they endured, all that experience was a little bit more than tough love, and it was, a little bit more traumatic. And so sometimes people come to therapy saying, I don't feel right. And then they learn that there's a lot of traumatic stuff going on that they wouldn't have necessarily said was traumatic given the normalcy that things like that happen in their life. Kids that are raised in chaotic homes and things like that, they grow up to be adults. Hopefully that's the goal, right? And so I do have some people that come in kind of seeking that like guidance, more of like a life coach approach, where they're just trying to better themselves. But I do think that a lot of times it is like a big stressor that brings people into therapy.
How it makes sense. It makes sense. I'm gonna go into a little bit. Those of you that follow me know my story. A little over 2 years ago, lost my husband. So the kids were 12, almost 12 and 16. And so I'm going to just encourage the widowed parents out there. If you've lost a spouse, if you've lost a child or anything like that, I think, losing a spouse and then you're the only caregiver for these kids, I think it's really important to go and become the best version of yourself. I saw a statistic the other day. It was like, I don't know if it was percentage statistic, but it basically talked about that when a child loses one of their parents, their percentage of success in life heavily depends on the surviving parent, like how well they're adjusting and doing life, and so I think that's really important. So any mamas or dads that are out there that have lost your spouse, I encourage you to go and talk to somebody and become the best version of yourself for those kids. Okay, so let's dive into a little bit more of, like tips on staying mentally healthy. What does that look like? I mean, I know this is general and this is, we'll give the disclosure of, where this is coming from, take it for what it is. But just in general, I mean, what do you tell people? Like, and you just had a couple tips on just staying mentally healthy.
So the first step of staying mentally healthy or even being mentally present is being self-aware. And strangely enough, that can be one of the hardest steps to come to. Sometimes that is a step that has to be met to even get into worrying about your mental health, right? Is to realize that there's something going on that doesn't feel quite right. I think paying attention to your feelings and kind of trying to put words to that. So as far as, it can seem silly, like Googling, like, emotions and the amount of emotions that come up, just being able to identify what those mean and what those feel like in our body. That's always going to be step number one, because without those warning signs, you don't know when you're, for example, having an anxiety attack. Like, we can't really expect that. Sorry, cut that far out. Okay, let me think where I can go back to. So if you're having like an anxiety attack, the goal is to know that's happening before it gets really bad, right? And so knowing those warning signs in your body are going to be crucial to being able to stop that in the process. You can't do that without self-awareness. Some other tips and kind of just like easier ways to go about it: exercise. And, I'm not going to lie, not my favorite activity. But, there is a lot of studies that show scratch that, let me not East Tennessee this up. There are a lot of studies that show that mind and body are linked. And it's really obvious sometimes, but sometimes it's not so obvious. And so just getting exercise, whether it's taking a walk, stretching, yoga, that's something that I want to try is yoga. So, just like little things like that, that get us in tune with our breathing. Breathing is one thing that is controlled by our kind of dormant brain that we're not paying as much attention to, like that survival part of our brain, as well as our conscious brain. Like, we're breathing whether we know it or not, but we can step in and we can control that. And so breathing exercises are one thing that, work for a lot of populations, because it is breathing that can really kind of communicate to our body, hey, you need to slow down. And so by forcing that to happen, if we can get our body to slow down, we can get our mind to slow down. And, as far as if you can't go to therapy or you're just not ready for it yet, because there is such thing as being ready for something like that, being able to like kind of get your feelings out in another way. So, if you're really artistic and stuff, that's how we get a lot of really good music, a lot of really good paintings, a lot of really good poetry, being able to flesh out your feelings in that way. Journaling is a big one that people love. And what I like about journaling is that, when someone does it through like a hard experience, like a lot of times it turns into a book, and that book can be spread out to help so many people. And so just like being able to think of things like that, to keep us mentally aware of ourselves, our surroundings, and how we're feeling, can be a major factor in being able to help with our mental health.
I love that. Okay, so I think we're going to wrap this up with that, with the 3 tips, because I think this is really crucial. So if you guys take anything away today, Emily talked about 3 things. So number 1, being self-aware, and that's truly just, knowing what your emotions are, knowing how you're feeling, just being very aware of everything going on in your heart and your mind. And then, mind and body working together. So exercise being like a way to reduce stress, and then, the breathing exercises and things like that. And then journaling. So everything that's happening up here, getting it onto paper so that we can understand those feelings. So I think those are awesome tips. I really appreciate you coming on today. Guys, if you got anything out of this, please like and subscribe down below. And thanks so much for watching. Okay.